Test, test, test. Looks good.
All right, everyone, thank you for coming. So we had a great presentation at our 11 o'clock session, and so now we're looking forward to like 3 hours jam-packed of some really excellent creation science information and how our faith plays into that as well. And so before we begin this session, we'll have a quick word of prayer, and then I'll introduce our first speaker. So, well, dear Lord, we just thank you for this opportunity to learn, to grow, to better defend our faith, and to be a blessing and to be blessed. And Lord, we just ask that your presence will be here with us. In Christ's name, amen. All right, our first speaker, Dr. Robert Stadler. He's come down from the Twin Cities and to join us. And so we are super blessed to have him here. He's an author. He's an inventor. He's really into this stuff, and I think he's going to really bless us with this topic about science and faith. How does this work? Okay, how when the nuts and bolts of all this. So without further ado, I'm just going to, Dr. Stadler, if you could come up and bless us.
Thank you. Hey everybody, it's very good to be here. Thanks for coming. There's an old movie scene where the bad guy holds up a gun to the victim and says, "Your money or your life." And I think our society is being pushed into something kind of similar to that, except it's your faith or science. Are you going to accept what science says, or are you going to be one of those anti-science, kind of mythological type people that we can't really trust? And if you think it's actually a battle that's been going on for more than 100 years. It's a battle between what God says in the Bible, where God clearly tells us that he was heavily involved in creating everything, time, space, matter, and energy, all from him, and that he created us in his image. What better compliment can you give someone to say, hey, you were made in God's image, right? And we were made special. And that he gave us his son to die for us, to save us. And he gives us a purpose. That's pretty important. God gives you a purpose. Your purpose is to love God and to love your neighbor. Now, science, on the other hand, seems to be telling us quite an opposite story. Science is telling us that you are a collection of millions of random mistakes, mutations that have happened over the years, filtered by natural selection, have produced you, luckily. And you have no purpose. There's no particular reason why you're here, according to science. So everything around us came about by physics and chemistry, just natural laws doing what they do, and boom, there you are. You happen to be here after lots and lots of time. So if you think I'm kind of over-amplifying this and making a big dramatic battle out of it, let me give you a little feel for what we actually see out there, what these soldiers are doing. They're taking aim at each one of us all day long. This is in a high school biology textbook, and it says, life arose from non-life via chemical evolution. Basically saying life came about when some molecules bumped into each other, and this happened for a while, and then you have life. And this is in your biology textbook in high school. Here's another one. Life began when organic molecules assembled in a coordinated manner within a cell membrane and began reproducing. So this is being taught to our kids, and yet I can tell you as a scientist that there's absolutely no scientific backing for these statements, and yet it's being taught to our kids. That's why these soldiers are here taking aim at you. This one's about cosmology, how the universe formed. And this is Lawrence Krauss, a famous atheist. He has to explain how everything came about, and he says in his book, everything came from nothing. Not only can something arise from nothing, but something will always arise from nothing, he says. I don't get that. And in this little clip, he's talking with a famous atheist, you probably know, Richard Dawkins. And I want to let you hear what he's saying here with Richard Dawkins. Play this.
Because I don't know if you've had this happen, but I've had people write me saying, I'm a medical doctor, and I don't believe in evolution.
That's a disgrace.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't hear that, but he said, I don't know if you've heard this, but I saw a medical doctor who says he doesn't believe in evolution. And Richard Dawkins says that's a disgrace, and then we continue.
I'm not allowed to say that because, especially in this country, one's private beliefs are supposed to be irrelevant. But I would walk out of a doctor's office and not consult him anymore if I heard that he said that. Because what that doctor is saying is that he's a scientific ignoramus and a fool.
We'll get back to that.
And you don't want a doctor who's a fool.
Yeah, or because I don't know if you've had this.
Okay, so Richard Dawkins is British, and so a nice British way to insult someone is to say that you're a scientific ignoramus. So he laid that one out there. We also have Bill Nye the Science Guy. Bill Nye is doing a tour right now of the United States. You could pay like $75 to go see him, I think, in Minneapolis next week. But he's also using his scientific credentials to tell you which presidential candidate science supports. I'm not kidding. But he wrote in this book, he said, the origin of life just requires some raw material that could allow the spark of life to emerge. And then we have a book by Jerry Coyne, another famous atheist. He's basically saying, he's laying out in clear, dispassionate detail why the toolkit of science, which is based on reason and empirical study, is reliable, while that of religion leads to incorrect, untestable, or conflicting conclusions. So you can feel the tension there. You can feel this battle that we're in. So I think God has actually called me to try to bring an end to this battle, to try to bring peace where there's a battle going on. And a lot of people are trying this, and I don't think they're doing it right. Some people try to end the battle by turning away from faith. They'll say, oh, the Bible is full of stuff that science has disproven. There's nothing reliable in there. I'm just done with that. Well, I don't recommend that. Other people have tried to end the battle by turning their back on science. Oh, those scientists are always saying stuff I don't believe. I'm not going to trust anything anymore. I don't recommend that because I happen to be a scientist too. Other people try to end the battle by rewriting what the Bible says. Maybe the Bible should say what scientists say the Bible should say. Just sort of scratch out some things, do a little editing. I don't recommend that. So the real problem lies over here. It's what science seems to be telling us. We're hearing what science seems to be telling us, but we have to realize that science actually doesn't say anything. It's scientists who say things. Scientists like all people, have sort of a natural tendency to push God away. Scientists tend to think they're pretty smart, they understand a lot of stuff. And so this natural relationship we have, where God is above us, God is God, is kind of being replaced in our modern society with science. Science is kind of becoming our God. If you ask somebody who just got diagnosed with cancer, what gives you hope for the future? They'll often say something related to science. Science is giving me hope. Science is their God. And the problem if science becomes your God, there's a lot of problems to that. But one big problem is you no longer appreciate that science has limitations. If science is God, it's not limited. It doesn't have any shortcomings, right? So we have to talk a little bit about limitations that science has that are very real. Number one, scientists, they constrain science so it's only allowed to speak about natural things. Science cannot deal with the supernatural. Science is there to talk about natural things. And it has a fancy name. For those who want to impress your friends someday, you could say you came here tonight and you talked about methodological naturalism. That's the philosophical term to say that when you do science, the method you use is assuming naturalism, meaning everything is natural and no supernatural. And I'm not here to say that's always bad, because I'm a scientist and I've based my career upon using at times methodological naturalism. My job as a scientist is trying to cure heart failure. I work at Medtronic and we're trying to cure people who have heart failure. I can't go to my boss and say, hey, I have a big project for next year. We're going to form prayer groups and we're going to pray for people who have heart failure, and that's what the company's going to do to cure heart failure, right? That doesn't work. So I have to find some other way to cure heart failure. And so I use methodological naturalism to say, let's find a way that we can help people with heart failure without, needing God to be involved, so to speak. But the problem is, if you apply this methodological naturalism to origins, the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the origin of humans, if you apply that, science then can lead us away from the truth, because science blocks out anything supernatural, only allowing natural process that's only allowed to be considered, and you might be missing out on the truth because you're kind of a blind eye to what might be the truth. And this methodological naturalism is almost never disclosed. It's kind of a hidden assumption that people don't talk about. So, if I talk about a simple question like, how did life begin? There's really just two answers. Either God did it, started life, or it happened through purely natural processes, right? We have to figure out which one of these is right. In the Bible, the very first time life is mentioned, Genesis chapter 1, verse 11, and God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind, on the earth. And it was so. So God tells us how life got started. Science has a different view of things. Science says that a bunch of chemicals, you could call it a primordial soup, a bunch of chemicals in some water somewhere started bumping into each other. Over time, they became more and more complicated and began to replicate themselves, get enclosed into a nice membrane, and then you have the very first living thing, a very microscopic little cell that started life. So, the first thing science is going to do, because of this methodological naturalism, the first thing science does is say, nope, we can't talk about this, this doesn't exist, we're not even thinking about it. That is a huge form of bias, right? You should be open to consider which one of these is right. Most scientists will say, this one's out of the picture. So the question we're trying to ask here actually has been changed. It's been subtly changed. Instead of how did life begin, it's what is the best natural explanation for the origin of life? And that's what these scientists are trying to answer, not even admitting or openly disclosing that they block this out. They're just trying to answer that. So is there a better way? Certainly, and this is kind of what I mentioned, is be open to both possibilities, look for evidence, and see which one the evidence supports. quite simple. So Ryan here and I have been involved in producing a series of videos that are on YouTube, and I'm going to be sharing parts of these videos with you. I think you'll enjoy them quite a bit. They're animated, they're fun, a little bit snarky. But this first video I'm going to show gives you a little bit of a feel for what's going on here and how our observations in all of our lives seem to contradict the idea that molecules just come together to form the first life. So we'll show this.
Know that when a living thing dies, nature takes its course. An irreversible one-way path of decay begins. The bits that the thing was made of, its complex molecules, they start to degrade and become disorganized and smelly. This natural process is unavoidable, and we have all observed it. Surprisingly, some really smart people, from Charles Darwin to scientists today, believe that the opposite process has occurred. They say, a long time ago, purely natural processes somehow created and arranged molecules required for the first ever living organism from a primordial soup, and that led to life as we know it today.
So I don't know if you've heard that before, but Charles Darwin is given some credit back in 1871 for suggesting that some molecules in a little soup of water started to bump into each other and became more and more complicated. And that was a little hint, he was saying, of how he thought life could have gotten started. But as we just saw in the video, we've all observed the opposite. We've all observed over time things fall apart, things decay. This is a book I wrote. It'll be, I should have kept a copy to hold up, but it's back there, and we're going to have some copies to sell. But it's a book about the origin of life and science, what science tells us about this. If you're going to get from basic chemicals and just take basic chemicals and get all the way up to where you have a living thing, even the most simple possible single-cell living thing, you got to get through all of these steps. All these things have to be accomplished to do that. The problem is we've all seen, and we've all observed this, that natural processes are kind of like gravity. They pull you down the steps. I'm getting a little old, and I'm starting to feel like I'm being pulled down the steps. Things are falling apart. Stuff decays over time. And yet some scientists are trying to tell us the opposite, this thing called abiogenesis, life starting from non-life. They think that happened naturally. It has to climb all the way up all these stairs. So I could go on for hours about all the different topics in here, but we're just going to cover one topic tonight. One topic, and it's going to be about the method of repairing biopolymers. Because I brought this up because I think it's something you may not appreciate, you may not know about. But your body and all living things, every form of life, is made up of lots and lots of biopolymers. Polymers are just monomers, individual molecules strung together, kind of like beads on a necklace. And these biopolymers come in the form of DNA. Everybody knows DNA, right? You got lots of DNA in you. You got proteins in you. You got polysaccharides in you. These are all biopolymers. The problem is, we all know, over time, these things fall apart. Right now, as you're sitting there, your DNA is falling apart. It's being attacked constantly. And what keeps you alive are repair mechanisms. So I'm going to give you a little video clip introduction to this, and then we'll go a little further, how it gets fixed.
Every day, your DNA experiences 10,000 lost single letters of code, and 10,000 cases of damage by oxidation, and 55,000 single strand breaks, as well as 10 of the extremely bad double strand breaks. All of these happen every day in just one of your cells. Just one! Multiply that by the trillions of cells in your body, and how in the, and I can't emphasize this enough, how in the actual world can we still be alive with our cells basically burning to the ground every second of every day? Great question.
So this is number 8 in our series of animated videos. These are all on YouTube. They're all free and quite enjoyable. And that's just the introduction to how your body needs to have repair mechanisms inside. Not just you, but every form of life, every cell that's ever existed has to have repair mechanisms. Now, why is that a problem for thinking that life just started through chemical processes? Let's go through that next. This is why it's a problem.
The simplest DNA repair mechanism of many is intimidatingly called base excision repair. Fixes a single damaged letter of DNA, and it's needed in every known form of life. If you had a damaged strand of DNA, first, one machine or protein enzyme scans down it and recognizes the single damaged letter. It would detach it from the DNA backbone, extracting it like an old, dirty tooth, leaving the functioning letters alone. Next, another machine detects the empty spot and breaks a single strand of the DNA backbone. A third machine then snips the DNA backbone again, removing the segment of backbone that's empty. These two enzymes have the ability to break the DNA backbone at will. Lucky ducky you, they only do this when needed, and at a specific site of damage. How could enzymes like this just pop up at the start of life without first destroying all of the DNA in sight? A question for the ages. A fourth machine then inserts the replacement part, an intact matching letter of DNA, complete with a new backbone segment. Finally, a fifth machine welds the replacement part to the backbone on both sides, completing the restoration. This is all oversimplified baby talk, of course. The actual mechanics of these things is far beyond what we can convey here. But all this madness is happening every day in every single one of these tiny little danger hot dogs, also known as bacteria. If your reaction to all of this isn't, "What?" then you're just not paying attention. This is literal submicroscopic surgery with the added monkey wrench of the cell does not stop operating while it's being repaired. Imagine trying to repair a Jeep while it's still running. And remember, base excision repair is just one of the many DNA repair pathways, and not even the most complicated one. Even the simplest organisms absolutely need repair mechanisms. The first life and all life needs repair at the very beginning. In bacteria, the instructions to make these 5 enzymes are coded in DNA, requiring more than 8,000 letters of information. If you're smart, you'd notice, just like the scientist Manfred Eigen, that this is a huge paradox. That much DNA could have never accumulated unless it was first protected by repair mechanisms. But the repair mechanisms themselves require at least this much DNA.
Okay, I hope everybody got that, right? These repair mechanisms are encoded in the DNA, and it takes about 8,000 letters, so that's maybe 10 pages in a book of information in your DNA. But that information in your DNA could never have persisted, could never have come about unless you have the repair mechanisms. So you have a paradox. You can't have A without B, you can't have B without A. And natural processes, just chemistry and physics, they don't solve paradoxes like that. You got to have some intelligence that can solve a paradox like that. So, we are told in our textbooks in school and such that a bunch of chemicals came together, got more and more complicated over time, and made the first living thing, this process of abiogenesis. But I can tell you as a scientist that this is speaking of something that's unnatural, meaning natural processes go the opposite way. It's unobservable, meaning no one has ever seen this. Even laboratories today where scientists are doing things in a lab, they can't make this happen. No one has ever seen it, and it's unscientific. And yet we're being taught that that's what happened. Why are we being taught that? That's a question for the ages. So we get back to this question we started with, how did life begin? Was it science or was it faith? It turns out if you're open to consider the evidence, all the evidence we have strongly opposes this. And because it's a dichotomy, you either have this or you have this, evidence that goes against this is evidence in favor of this. So we give glory to God because it's obvious what he did. Now that's just one limitation of science. Now we have to go into the second one that I got to talk about today. The second limitation is that scientists don't always prioritize the right evidence. Sometimes they prioritize evidence that's kind of weak and push down evidence that's actually really good evidence. And this is really important to me because I deal with the FDA in my job, and the FDA is really good at this. They listen to really good evidence, and they don't want to hear the weak evidence. Because medicine is so important to us, most of us have ourselves or a relative, a loved one, who's had a life and death kind of experience, and medicine, it's not perfect, but medicine is really important. It's life and death. So medicine has taught us to prioritize the best kind of evidence. In fact, don't worry about all the details here, but medicine has come together to say, this is the evidence we will trust the most, this kind of evidence. Don't worry about the details, but things like randomized controlled trials. That's what we trust. If I have a little pill and I say, this pill is going to cure cancer, well, I have to have evidence up here to support my claim, or else nobody's going to believe me. If you come down here, you start getting down to evidence that's pretty weak. And interestingly, the lowest form of evidence here is expert opinion. So if an expert says, I think this pill will cure cancer, that's not much. You can't really trust that. You got to have a big trial to show that it works. And I would love to see if all science had the same kind of prioritization of evidence that medicine has. Medicine has it because it's life and death. Evolution doesn't think in those terms, unfortunately, but evolution should have a scale of evidence. So how do you prioritize evidence? How do you know what evidence gives you confidence? And that's the topic of my first book, which is also out in the lobby, but there are 6 criteria mentioned in there, and they're pretty simple. Ryan, I wonder if I could ask you, there's handouts there. Maybe people would enjoy taking a handout, because I think this is really important, because I'd like everyone to go home understanding how to know when to trust evidence or when not to trust evidence. And these 6 criteria really should help you. And it's not just simply black and white, very bad, very good. There's a spectrum here, and you can have high confidence or medium high, and all the way down to low. So I'd like to go through these, and I think some of them will be really obvious, I hope, at first. Number 1 is that things have to be repeatable. Evidence has to be repeatable. So let's say I have a simple experiment. I have an object, and I want to know, how fast does the object fall? That's what I want to do. If I do that now and I do the experiment, good, I get my answer. If I do that repeatedly, again and again and again, my confidence goes up. I got the answer right, and then I have you do the experiment, and you get the same answer. And I have someone in Japan do the experiment, and they get the same answer. The confidence just goes through the roof, right? It's really simple, but it has to be repeatable. Number 2, it has to be something that's directly measurable. When I look at this object with my own eyes, I see it fall, I make the measurement, that's pretty directly measured. Here's a good example. Let's say you want to measure your child's body temperature. This is the way my mom used to measure my temperature when I had a fever. Or you could do it a more scientific way. Which one gives you more confidence? Right? A direct measurement is always better than an indirect measurement. Your head feels hot. This one might be a little more subtle, but science gives you more confidence when it's done as a prospective study. What that means is that you design the experiment in advance, you think through all the details, especially you think through what could confuse the result, what could be a confounding factor, and then you get that out of the experiment. So, dropping an object, I don't want any wind in the room, right? I don't want an earthquake to be going on. Maybe you don't even want air in the room, right? In a vacuum, this thing falls without any inhibitions, and that's the right answer of how fast does an object fall. So I can plan all that in advance, do a prospective study, and I'm more confident in the result. The opposite is just to watch some historical thing, watch a videotape of somebody dropping something. You don't know the situation, the conditions that happen, you don't know what's going on, so you have lower confidence. Number 4 is to avoid bias. We all have bias. Everybody has bias. Bias is kind of like glasses that you look through, because everything you see is through your bias, through the glasses. And good science gets bias out. As a scientist, when I write a research protocol, I have to have a section that says, how am I going to avoid bias? Built in. Bias is a terrible thing for science. Number 5, avoid assumptions. Assumptions are kind of like shortcuts. If you want to take a shortcut and save some money, you assume something, and that often gets you into trouble. So I do this study where I'm going to drop an object, and I just said, it'd be good if we got all the air out of this room to do the experiment. You know how painful it is to get all the air out of this room? It's going to cost us about $4 million. It's going to delay the project by 9 months. Can't we just assume that the air is not a big deal? So these are kind of things that you do in science to save some money, save some time. But watch out. At least you have to openly disclose them and say, you know what, I assume the air is not a big deal. So I openly disclose it, and then you provide some justification. But if you just pop in assumptions without telling anybody, that's a big problem. And then the final one is about making reasonable claims. When you're done with your work, you have to make reasonable claims. And to explain that, I really like to talk about this here can of nuts. This is a can of nuts that you could go buy at the store. And on the can, it says, scientific evidence suggests, but does not prove that eating nuts may reduce the risk of heart disease. So of course, the people who make those nuts, they want you to eat lots of nuts, right? They want that. And so they want to make claims like, if you eat these nuts, you'll live forever. That's what they want to say. But the FDA says, no, that's not right. You got to only claim stuff that's reasonable. And so they claim something that's actually reasonable given the evidence they have. So I applaud this can of nuts. The problem is, not everybody adheres to that. This was in my son's high school biology textbook. It says, organisms as dissimilar as humans and bacteria share genes inherited from a very distant common ancestor. So it's saying that we evolved from bacteria, and one way we know that is because a bacteria has a gene and a human has a gene that are really pretty close. Now, you can see this statement doesn't have any terms in it like maybe or could be or we might have. It says everything really, really strongly, like you're slamming your fist on the table. I'm so sure about this. It's a very false kind of confidence. It's not a reasonable claim. So, strangely, we live in a society that cares about the claims that nuts make, but we don't care about the claims that are made in your high school biology textbook. Why is that? Got to ask yourself that question. So on the scale from low confidence to high confidence, we have these 6 criteria. So tomorrow, I want each of you tomorrow, when you hear the news and they say, we found something on Mars or whatever it is, you can apply these 6 criteria to think, how much do I trust what I just heard? Do I really have confidence in it or not? Now, we went through the example of dropping an object, and I'm telling you the question of how fast does an object fall, science can just nail that question. Very high confidence. If you do it right, you'll be totally confident of the answer you get. So this question is way over here on the high confidence end. What about this? The organisms as dissimilar as humans and bacteria share genes from a very distant common ancestor. That was in my kids' biology textbook, so it must be confident, right? Well, let's apply the 6 criteria. The question we're trying to answer is, do humans and bacteria share genes from a common ancestor? First question, is it repeatable? You can't take a bacteria and watch it evolve into a human? It's totally not repeatable. Nobody could do that. Is it something you can directly observe? Not at all. Nobody witnessed this so-called event. Is it something you can study prospectively? So in the laboratory, you take a bacteria and you wait around and it becomes a human? Totally retrospective. Are they careful to avoid bias? Do you think this statement has any bias built into it? It has huge bias built into it. Basically, they have blocked out anything supernatural up front with a methodological naturalism. So only natural explanations are allowed. And this is the best natural explanation for why you're here. What about assumptions? Basically, this whole statement is an assumption because they're saying that if a bacteria has a gene and humans have a gene that are similar, that's a fact. We do have genes that are similar to bacteria. The assumption is Why do we have the similar gene? It's because of common ancestor. The bacteria was your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. That's why you have a similar gene. That's an assumption. The whole thing is an assumption. And then reasonable claims, we already talked about that. Very overstated claims. So this statement belongs way down here in the very low confidence bin. So I'd like all of you, when you read something like that, this little red flag should go off in your head now, that that's not a very confident statement, even though it seems to be expressing a lot of confidence. So medicine does a good job of lifting up the evidence that has good confidence and pushing down evidence that doesn't have good confidence. We got to do that with evolution. So let's do that. We have another question here. How do we get complex life? You are complex life. Any kind of animal, any kind of plant, very complicated. Where do we get that? Science is telling us that that single cell created by abiogenesis went through a tree of life. This is the common ancestor to everything, and it diverged out to all of life. And of course, God in the Bible has a different explanation for it, as we see there. God explains everything where it came from. So, what evidence do we have that could support this macroevolution? Macroevolution means big scale evolution. What evidence do we have? Well, if you go in your biology textbook, again, this was my son's high school biology textbook. Every biology textbook calls out these 4 pieces of evidence. Fossil record, you know what that is? Geographic distribution. That's saying, like, why don't we have penguins here in Minnesota? Geographic distribution. Vestigial organs, like your appendix. They think that's evidence that you evolved because you have an appendix. And then comparing life forms. Like if you look at a dog and they have 1 bone here and then 2 bones here and then 5 fingers. Dogs, humans, bats, we all have similar structure. That's comparison of life forms. They see that as evidence for evolution, okay? But you have to recognize this book is only containing 1/2 of the argument. It's like 1/2. It's not even talking about the other because it's not allowed to. We also have our friend Richard Dawkins, and he agrees with all of this. Pay attention to what he has to say about this.
All the evidence used to support the theory of evolution, what would you say is the strongest, most irrefutable single piece of evidence in support of the theory?
There's an enormous amount of evidence from all sorts of places, and it's hard to pick one strand which is more important than any other. There's fossils, there's the evidence from geographical distribution, there's the evidence from vestigial organs. I think, to me, perhaps the most compelling evidence is comparative evidence from modern animals, particularly biochemical comparative evidence, genetic, molecular evidence.
Out of all the
Okay, so you just heard him say that out of all the evidence for evolution, his favorite one is this one. It's the most compelling evidence that he's got. Give me your best stuff. That's what he's got. Do you know what that most compelling evidence actually is? It's this statement here. It's comparative. You're saying bacteria have a gene, humans have a gene. They're pretty similar. That's what he says is the most compelling evidence. And we just tore this one apart, right? We just went through it and said this is the lowest confidence junk evidence out there. But he says that's the best. I find that very interesting. So all these criteria for high confidence evidence are failed by this statement. This statement fails all of them. It turns out that every one of these 4 types of evidence fail every one of these 6 criteria. My book goes into great detail on that. But all of this evidence for macroevolution fails all of these criteria. It's all very, very weak. Which leaves us with the question, is there any high confidence evidence for evolution? And I'm going to surprise you and say there is. Okay? High confidence evidence for evolution. This is evidence that's done in a laboratory, and it's done repeatedly, prospectively, directly measured, low bias, low assumptions. This guy, Richard Lenski, he has devoted his life to over 70,000 generations of bacteria in the laboratory. Every day he grows 7 more generations in the laboratory for 10,000 days. That's devotion. But what he's interested in is after 70,000 generations, let's look at the DNA and let's look at the beginning, way back when, and see what has changed. Has there been any evolution going on here? That's really high confidence science, and it's repeatable. After 33,000 generations, he found that the bacteria could now digest something called citrate, which it could not digest previously. And that was a big deal, and that made the news. Richard Dawkins, our friend, he said, this is a beautiful demonstration of evolution in action. New information entering genomes and combinations of new genes. This was in his book called The Blind Watchmaker. Unfortunately, he made this statement before the DNA had been analyzed, before they had published what had changed in 70,000 or 33,000 generations of DNA. When they actually published the results, here's the references, they found that this bacteria already had a gene and it duplicated that gene. It made another copy of it. And the bacteria had another gene and it lost control over that gene. That gene only used to be used when there was no oxygen around, and now the gene is used even if there's oxygen around. So the point is, there were no new genes, there's no new information, it's just kind of a little bit of a scramble of information that's already in there. So I think he made a huge mistake. And what we're actually finding after 70,000 generations is that there really wasn't any evolution. And that's high confidence evidence. It's not junk evidence. All right, I hope this isn't tiring because it gets me all excited, I'll tell you. There's more evidence here. This is my favorite experiment. All right, this is an enzyme, which is a protein. Your body's all full of these protein enzymes doing all this work for you. This one is helpful to manufacture tryptophan, which is something you need to survive. These investigators are pretty smart. They said, I'm going to purposely damage the DNA that makes this enzyme and then see if evolution can fix the problem that I created. Pretty cool, huh? And this was done repeatably, prospectively. It did everything right, okay? They changed just one letter of the DNA. Out of 2,000 letters of DNA, they changed one. And that made the enzyme a lot less effective. It still kind of worked, but it was weak. And then they let the bacteria live in a petri dish, and they found out that the bacteria did in fact fix that one letter, and that bacteria became more powerful than its friends and took over the population. It evolved to fix it. They said, cool, okay, we can fix one letter. Now let's try two. So they had the same mistake as before in the DNA, and they added one more. So they had two mistakes in the gene. And the bacteria, the enzyme now didn't work at all. But evolution that found out after 10,000 generations of bacteria, it was unable to fix this problem. Basically, the bacteria said, I'm not even going to try to use that gene anymore. It just sort of jettisoned the gene because it saves energy not making garbage. So that's kind of surprising. So evolution failed to repair an enzyme that was already 99.9% complete and in perfect form. It just needed two little letters out of 2,000 letters of DNA. So if evolution can't do that, then how could it ever have evolved starting with nothing? You start with 99.9% and it fails? I think that's very telling. And this is high confidence evidence. A couple of quickies at the end. For 95 years, scientists have been playing with mice in the lab. And in 95 years of trying to change everything and mutate everything, this mouse over here actually has 6 legs. 6 legs, that's pretty cool. But you know, it's still a mouse. And 95 years of trying, the mice still want to be mice. And the same happens with fruit fly experiments, zebrafish, domestic animals. We keep breeding dogs. We make weird dogs that don't have hair, and dogs that are small, and dogs that are big. And they're all the same species. They're dogs. They're still dogs. And then one final last one, because this just came out like 2 months ago. There's this little microcrustacean. You can't see, it's microscopic. But these scientists studied the thing for 10 years, and they looked at the DNA over 10 years, and they conclude basically nothing changed. So this is all high confidence evidence, and it's showing us that if you openly consider option A, option B, and you weigh the evidence, the high confidence evidence is far and away over on this side, and only this junk low confidence evidence that Richard Dawkins tells you about could support this. Amen. That's where we're at. That's what the science says. Okay, so we have these two limitations of science. So when it comes to the origin of the universe, the origin of first life, the origin of complicated life, what I'm trying to say is that society is abusing science, and that creates this conflict. The conflict is artificially created because of abuse of science. This big battle that I talked about, and my goal is to resolve this battle. The way to resolve it is proper application of science. If you recognize its limitations and you don't exclude God at the start, you resolve the conflict. And that's why I'm here. Amen. So just to wrap up, these books out there are available. This is the video series that we have. We're about to release our 9th video in the series, all telling us why molecules don't just create life. And here's some contact information for me, and I'll be back for the second. Should we take questions, or do we? It's a little dangerous to try to drink water when it's sitting up here with all these chemicals. I hope this isn't sulfuric acid.
Yeah, right. You just get the right bottle. That's all I ask, right? Okay. Anybody have any questions for Dr. Stadler on science and faith? Oh, yes, sir.
Hi. I have a question that basically science and religion or faith has been in conflict. You talked about clear back in the 1850s. That conflict came up when science evolution was presented. And at the same time, the church came to a hard standing that none of that would ever exist, which now put the scientists in the 1800s to divide away from faith because the church was pushing them away. Okay, I think we know that is in studies. So you became, all the scientists were trying to prove their parts, as you said, with over this time, dividing away from faith because the church had pushed them away from faith. They weren't allowing them. Originally, Darwin was survival of the fittest and adaptation, where now we're getting a little more in depth, which is better. But we run the conflict the same way, where you have faith, which is a belief. You have science trying to prove anything they can away from the faith. But when you lay a scientist, I'm just asking this as a question, because I do believe in creation. The faith you have, or the true evidence that you have, you presented why evolution, that they're pushing as far as they are, is not. We've gone through the Big Bang Theory, we've gone through all of these different things over the years. They're always trying to prove something of evolution. We, as faith, have to take the belief in God, the belief in the universe is bigger. That is still a step of faith, too. So I was asking, I hope in the next session or somewhere you cover, what is our proof now for creation? Because you've proven that there's not a lot for science. But my question comes back, what is the true evidence that has to just following your criteria for faith?
Well, a couple things I want to clarify is I kind of artificially labeled this. This is not blind faith, right? The point of this whole presentation is that this faith is actually evidence-based because of all the evidence that I presented here. And it takes faith to believe in what's going on over here, right? So there's faith on both sides. But because this is actually a dichotomy, when you come to what creates complex life, it's either this or this. And so evidence against this one, which I presented, actually counts in favor of evidence for this. So all that evidence, all that high confidence evidence that I presented is in favor of this. It supports that.
what about the possibility of more evidence coming later on either side?
Right. You always have to be open to future evidence. You absolutely have to. But at the moment, sorry, I didn't do this. You know, at the moment, the evidence is very strong in our favor, and that's where I'm at. You have to be open to future evidence showing up. But be very cautious. Like I said, tomorrow morning, you're going to hear new evidence on the news. Apply those 6 criteria to what you hear. And is it high confidence or low confidence? It's really an important part of this. Yeah.
I mean, the next talk will, I think, argues more that there's evidence.
More evidence.
There's more evidence when we look at how energy is utilized.
Yeah.
That there will be more evidence there. But that's a powerful argument to say, look, there's all of this evidence that was supposed to be in favor of a naturalistic perspective. And anytime they do these long, by the way, I wanted to say that the Lenski was done in Michigan State University, so it was Michigan research there.
More Michigan, yeah.
Yeah, go Michigan. But they're actually showing all that 70,000 generations. You would think they would see more things. There would be more evidence. That's over 2 million years worth of human.
Yeah.
If you were to relate it to humans, you'd think over 2 million years, there should be some really big major changes. But if they're not in these experiments getting high quality evolutionary based evidence, then it starts to point the other direction.
So remember I showed the stairway that this book is about? The next talk is about energy harnessing, which is a requirement for life. That'll be one of the other steps that we got to cover.
It sounds like the E. coli genome is pretty stable, but we do have examples where viruses are incorporated into human cells, become cancer, become different things, and those are big jumps of DNA and changes. Of course, they haven't changed any species, but how do you explain that when you're talking to people about changes in genes and changes in genome?
Yeah, I'm certainly not trying to say that our genome is fixed. It's dynamic, and things do change over time. So viruses happen, and our own genome actually rewrites our own genome. That things change over time. And I believe God built that into us to make us robust, right? Things adapt over time. You're adapting to the environment. There's tons of examples coming out now where living things sense something about their environment and they respond to it by changing themselves, not to a different species, not for a bacteria to become a monkey or something, but they adapt by changing their own DNA, transposable elements and so forth, in response to that threat of the environment. So God built in the ability to do that, but it's not evolution, it's a built-in engineered robustness.
When you have conversations with other, let's say, evolutionary-based scientists, and if you ever have a discussion with them about the 6 criteria for high confidence science, how does that conversation go? And are they are folks open to that, and then any suggestions on how just like the common layperson would have a conversation with?
Yeah, good question. Thanks. That book came out. This book came out 8 years ago, and I've had a lot of interactions with people, of course, but I've never had anyone tell me that those 6 criteria are wrong. They agree with those criteria. They just don't like the conclusion that it reaches, right? In fact, Richard Lenski, the guy that did 70,000 generations, he argues to this day that his experiment was encouraging for evolution. And I think it's because he's got such a strong bias. With those glasses on, he's looking at his own evidence with the glasses of bias and seeing things that I don't see in the data. So how to talk to other people about it? That's a good question. You can try to encourage them as far as not all evidence is created equally. What gives you more confidence in some evidence than others, and those ideas come to mind. And then you can try to talk them through the fact that what we're taught in schools isn't always the best quality evidence. And the best quality evidence is actually speaking against evolution. That's the hard part, right? That's where they're going to say, like, you're way out of there. Yeah.
All right, we'll take this last question, then we'll break for like 1 second, and then go to our next meeting.
I think your point that evidence needs to be considered with varying degrees is extremely important. One, as you point out, has been emphasized in medicine, but although not for that long, really. It's really only been at most 50 years that medicine has appreciated that. And in part, that's happened because there's been entities that have forced that to happen. So at a community, quote, individual level, a lot of things went wrong, and then the government stepped in, and so entities like the FDA help people do what's right. And we don't have a similar system like that for the science side. And so you had asked this question, well, why is it that medicine can appreciate these different levels of evidence, but some of these statements that get made in, for example, textbooks don't have that same nuance? And one answer might be is because there's not a similar level of regulation on that side.
Yeah,
Would you want that kind of regulation to happen?
Well,
and if so, by whom?
That's a very good point. I will point out that nuts are regulated like that. So we take care of medicine and nuts, but not evolution. So, but I do think that our school districts and those who pick the textbooks and so forth, they would say that they're regulated, but it tends to be a group that's exclusively on one side of this debate already. So they pick the textbooks, and that's what our kids are getting. We got to work on that, right? I would love to see some improvements in that area. But you're right, all this stuff about medicine, appreciating levels of science, it came from lots of bad medicine, right? From snake oil salesmen and leeches and stuff like that. And society said, wait a minute, we got to stop this. We need good evidence behind medicine.
Okay. All right, excellent.
Okay,
well,
thank you.
Thank you, yes. Well, all right, excellent. And so now we'll take a, all right, that's, okay. All right, so it's now 4:58. We'll take 2 minutes and stretch break, whatever. Three, okay, all right. So he's generous. Yeah, okay, yeah, generous speakers here. So, all right, take a few minutes and we'll be back.
It's gonna.
We actually teach that in the textbooks. It comes in usually in the first, what is the scientific method? And these things will come up, but then it doesn't ever.
Never comes back again.
That's exactly. That's
And not-
exactly right.
like I do not do anything in my general chemistry class.
Yeah.
We don't. There's no time.
Yeah.
There's no time for it.
And maybe they can't agree. The philosophers will argue about this is better than this. No, this is better.
I don't think, I don't know what the answer is. I don't think it's that, because this is, I think because like you said, everybody will agree on those 6 things. I think if you went to, I was just at Society for Neuroscience, which is 22,000 people, pretty sure if you stood up,
Most people would say
I
that.
think everybody is going to agree with that. So I think this comes down to that when you really have fringe people. Richard Dawkins is fringe. He is not a core scientist. Even people, Stephen Jay Gould was much more centered than
Yeah,
even.
yeah,
So,
that's right.
the people on the fringes are going to get into these debates.
And he's a good debater.
And he's a good debater. He is a good debater. He's very famous, but they're a little fringe, honestly. And so that's the promise.
But they're fringe, but they're out in front of everybody, right?
That's
Right?
true with almost everything today.
Yeah, yeah. Get the fringe and put it out front.
Bill Nye.
It's the same. He's the same kind.
Mr. High school science teacher.
He's not even a scientist.
He's not even a scientist. Yeah. All right. Are we going? Oh, am I on? We ready? Yeah, I'll just go again here. Yeah. Most people might have been at church. I don't know. Or do we have some new people? Okay. I'll just introduce. Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started with the next part here. Water, yeah, I was thinking. Yeah, we'll have to. Okay, thank you for hanging in there and sharing in the passion that some of us have for these complex questions. So for the next part, we want to talk about energy. Everybody needs some energy right now? Yeah. Energy? Yeah. You could tell an energy drink because they have the shape to it, right? I'm sure it's a V8 variety. So I'm Ryan Hayes. I teach chemistry at Andrews University. And just a quick story on how Rob and I got together. It was actually another chemist, James Tour, right? I think it was from James Tour is a chemist at Rice University out of Houston, and he made quite a bit of waves by expressing some doubt in these low confident results dealing with the origin of life. And we had him as a guest speaker at Andrews. It was over Zoom. We gotta love Zoom because you can get people from all over. And right after that, somehow I went on to a YouTube channel to express some concerns of the lack of quality research in the origin of life. And I think Rob was one of the chatters on there, and James Carter, and then we started getting together and saying, look, what evidence is there that talks about, what is the real evidence? Can molecules come together to form life? And a big part of that is how do we deal with the energy issue? Because these primordial soups, if we had energy, maybe at the bottom of the ocean there's a lot of energy there, coming out of these hydrothermal vents, is that enough to propel chemicals to come together to make life? And so we're going to talk about that. And kind of a fun title, Life is the Worst. We'll see what that's all about. So once again, I started at church today. What is chemistry? Oh, let's see if you guys remember. How can you tell if you're doing chemistry? Changes color. What else? It blows up? Yep. It smells. I like that. Actually, I thought that was biology. Changes temperature. That could be physics. I think chemistry. I think it's chemistry too. That's definitely, I think that's good. Bubbles, come on. If it bubbles, we'll do some bubbling reaction here in a little bit. Yeah, all of those things. That's chemistry. And I think sometimes when we think about that it's only done in the lab. Chemists do chemistry in the lab, and that's it. But the reality is chemistry can be everywhere, even on the edge of a warm pond or out in nature. To us, it's all chemistry. It's chemicals. And I always got to kind of preface this when we talk about chemistry and chemicals. Sometimes it's part of what happens in our society. Oh, there's chemicals in there. And the word kind of has this negative connotation that, oh, if there's chemicals in it, it's bad. Well, to scientists, everything's chemicals. But there's good ones and there's bad ones. And, but we're not here to talk about good and bad chemicals, although that may be something you might be interested in. We'd love to talk about that. But is there chemistry that occurs in nature? And yeah, all materials are chemical. And they obey chemical and physical and mathematical laws everywhere, no matter where they are. Now, there may be things that we still don't know, but there's quite a few behavioral things that we know about. So, can chemicals evolve to make life? See, I already had this picture, Rob. Okay. And so I actually set my Google, you can do a Google search, and I get set up, and every week I get, are there any articles on how life evolved from nothing? And you'd be surprised how frequently these articles are coming out, because this is not a solved area. There are so many unanswered questions, and there's a lot of scientists who are getting into this and trying to speculate what's going on. But it's not just chemicals that are out in nature. It's chemistry everywhere. I mean, it could be in the kitchen. I mean, chemicals and how we understand and how they work are everywhere. And we know from working in the kitchen that energy is a big part. Right? I mean, we all make things in the kitchen, at least I hope, especially the kids. Parents, one of the best things you can do with your kids to teach them about chemistry and science, get them in the kitchen. Go make something. Cookies, preferably, and you should have brought them to the talk. Pizza would be great, because you're learning all the great things about, there's a certain amount of ingredients that are needed, there's recipes to follow, and there's consequences to not following the recipe. And there's consequences to not having the right amount of energy for the right amount of time. And so one of the key things about chemical reactions that we want to focus on is that they need energy. They need energy to go in some way. We need to think about how the chemicals interact with energy. And so after we have, where did all my, I think we lost some things there. There's a little, anyway, I've lost a few words on there. Hopefully some of them will come back. Chemistry is about having the right ingredients, which I'm showing here. What do you think what I'd be trying to make with these ingredients here? Flour, butter, milk. What do you guys think? Cake, right? Could be cake, cookie, somewhere in there. Not making a lasagna, right? So if you have the right ingredients, that's just the start. And chemistry is about putting things together to make a product. What are we trying to make? So this is how we think. I have ingredients, I'm trying to get to a product. But I need energy to get to that part. And we think of energy in so many different ways. Light energy, we got, maybe water can give us some energy, just heat from the ground, oil, nuclear energy. And we've got to think about these things, because if chemistry doesn't get the energy problem right, well, then it's no fun. Now for life, it's life and death. Life dies. In the kitchen, you just can't eat it, right? And you got to throw it out. Got the energy problem wrong. So we really want to break down the energy problem here into some very fundamental things. We'll try to make it fun and help see something maybe you hadn't seen before, hadn't thought about, and especially if you're a scientist. So one of the ways that we need to think about chemical reactions is that we're trying to take some ingredients and move them uphill, especially the reactions that we have in mind, the important ones that deal with living systems. You have to try to move something uphill. Well, I have lights. I mean, can he just shine light on a skier? Do you think that would move him uphill? right? If I just shine, right, light is energy. Why can't I just shine light on the skier? Would that move him up? No. Okay, what if I had wind? Maybe, especially if we could get a tornado like one, and if it was directed, maybe. Okay, they don't blow him over. So there's a chance there. How about lightning? That's a lot of energy. Let's just strike him with lightning a bunch of times, and that'll, no, okay, that won't work. Well, a volcano, there we go. There's a lot of energy. Would the skier survive that? No, probably not. Well, we can hook up a battery. They're finding that there are there's natural locations, like at the bottom of the ocean, that was the new thing, where there are some natural battery-like electrical flow, and it was producing a little bit of oxygen at the bottom of the ocean. So, I mean, there could be batteries out there. And we know that to get a skier uphill, okay, of course they could try to generate their own energy, and that's hard, that it requires a certain type of energy. We can use explosions, but we put them inside of little motors, and we light them up, and a little generator runs it, and it moves some wheels, and eventually we can put them in a car, and a cable car, and move them up. And so to try to move things around, it's not just about random energy, it's about having the right type of energy and how you control that so that you can do something useful. And that's what life really is. It's a bunch of chemical reactions in a factory-like situation that we understand that they all have energy that's coming in at the right time. This is actually one of our better views of how life is working. It's this little factory that's going around. I mentioned factories that trees were sugar factories today. And cells and everything that we're made of, they're little energy factories that are harnessing energy and doing some very useful work. But where did all of this energy come from? How do we think through it? I think there's a very stunning thing that we've come to a conclusion that we want to think about here today. Well, maybe not a conclusion, but some very important thoughts. How do chemists break down this energy for chemical reactions? So this is how I teach my students in class. And we think about the energy that's available for chemical reactions in two ways. Or there's two types of energy. One of them has to do with heat. And so if you can apply heat in some way, maybe just it's warmth coming from the ground, or we have a Bunsen burner, you can turn on an oven, that we can apply heat. And we say, you're heating it up. We can also cool it down. So we can remove heat from a situation because maybe there's too much heat, right? You're going to burn something. So can we remove it? We call this enthalpy, but there's two forms of it. Heating and cooling, we call it a plus and a minus. And so there's two sides of that. So that kind of makes sense. Apply heat, cool it down, put some ice on it. We're familiar with that. But there's another type of energy that's in this universe that we hear about, and it's kind of weird and freaky, and so I wanted to talk about that. And it's called entropy. Now, entropy is kind of confusing, but I would be curious, what have people heard about entropy? Because I know we got some scientists in here. If you hear entropy, what do you hear? So let's have a little feedback. I'll try to repeat it for anybody. When you hear entropy, what do you hear? Try not to read the words there. What have you heard before? What's that? Randomness. Entropy is about randomness. Okay? Organized to disorganized. Has anybody heard anything else? Maybe, who has heard of entropy before? Raise your hand. Okay? Oh, wow, okay, a lot of people. All right. So I have to learn how to deal with this as a scientist, but I also have to learn it as a teacher, and how do I explain this? And in chemistry, so entropy is spreading out and has to do with randomness, things becoming more spread out. What we see is that, well, in fact, I want to start to demonstrate what it is, but it's a force. I want you to think about it. It's a force that's out there that spreads things out. So we're going to try to visualize that here. You want to do it? No, okay, I'm just adding. No, okay, we're going to do something here. Okay, it's not hard. I can do it, but all right, so all I'm going to do to help illustrate entropy here, oh, okay, I see what we're doing. All right. Is I'm going to put a drop of food color. I might put a couple in here, and I think it will show up on the camera. Okay, I thought maybe we could. Okay, we're going? Oh, I don't know. That's kind of, this may or may not work. Okay, we're messing around here. We're running an experiment in 2 ways. Yes. Oh, good. Kids are coming up front. Maybe they might just need to come up. How about, I don't think that's going to work. While he's getting that worked on real quick, you guys, I don't know if you guys saw the potato we did earlier. This has been sitting in water, and the water has been moving into the potato and moving up the hill. Ah, okay. All right. All right. I was hoping this would be more dramatic, but while you're here, we'll try to do maybe a couple experiments. Okay. So I am putting in this food coloring here. Maybe we'll put quite a few in. Okay. Oh, maybe right down in the front. If I just let it sit there for a little bit, kids, what do you see that's going on with the food coloring? What's happening to the food coloring? Dropping down. Is it doing anything else? Spreading out? Man, that's really cool. Man, that's got some really cool look in there. So over time, this is, man, you can really see, you guys see anything that's in there? Ooh, something else may show up. Ah, you're going to see something hopefully in a little bit here. So as this is spreading out, the main driving force right now is entropy. Now, it expresses itself because there's little molecules in there you can't see, and they're kind of moving and bumping around. It's called Brownian motion. But this is really a good way to see entropy. What do you guys, yeah, it's really cool. So over time, what do you guys think is going to happen to the food coloring? Even more, right? It's going to spread out even more. And this is what entropy does. It just spreads things out. Maybe we need a few more drops in there. Now, we don't have a ton of time to watch all of it happen here, but so maybe we should try to speed it up a little bit, and this is what we try to do as chemists. Man, those are really cool looking things. Let's see if I can, I'll just speed it up. So I'll be entropy at high speed here, okay? And let's see if we can see anything interesting that's happening down there. Do you guys see anything down here? Yeah. That's kind of fun in there. So I actually have, you can see I have some Orbeez in there. Those are kind of fun. And those are hard to see because they're still growing. But you can see them now because they're not picking up. But that wasn't the point. The point is entropy is spreading out. And that's one example. Keep the camera going because we're going to, actually we'll just do another one by looking at the potato. Let's go, I'll just go to the potato right now. We're going back to the potato. And you can see that the liquid had moved up. Now, for those that were here, I actually said this earlier, the main driving force to moving the good clean water on the outside and moving it in through the potato is actually entropy. So we're seeing entropy at work in a couple ways. It's spreading out the food coloring, and here it's actually spreading out the food coloring because it's moving the water through the potato, the semi-impermeable membrane, and it's spreading things out. So entropy spreads things out. So what does entropy do? And there's a force out there that's what it's doing, is spreading things out. And I think we'll go back to the slides. Yeah. And so there's this force out there, and we're uncomfortable with it because we're used to heat. You put heat in there, that drives chemical reactions. But entropy, spreading things out, yep. It's how gases spread out. But it's not all good news because things that are long and string-like, entropy will kind of break those things up. And I'm looking at you, RNA, and DNA and proteins. Entropy is fighting those, and it's trying to spread them out and break them apart, which is one of the many reasons why they do break, as Rob talked about earlier. And then that's just where I was going to come back to the potato, and that entropy is driving the water through because that is diluting the really high sugar that we had inside the potato, and it's spreading, it's moving the water in and is driving it up. So whether you believe in and understand entropy or not, but that's osmosis is driven by entropy. The slow mixing of the food coloring was entropy, and it's spreading it out. So as scientists, we take those aspects. Now you can try to fight entropy and try to bring the food coloring back together. We actually have one of our labs, we teach our students how to do that. Okay, it requires work, and we got to put it through a filter, but we can collect it and we can move it back together. So you got to overcome entropy. We can reverse this process by putting a pressure on it, and then we can put the food coloring back together again. But you have to deal with entropy spreading out and coming together. You have to deal with heat, warming up, and cooling things down. When you put all four categories together, when you put those four aspects together, there's four categories of chemical reactions. There are reactions that they produce heat. Like a fire. When you light a fire, are fire hot? Are they hot, you guys? Would you put your hand in there? No, don't do that. Fires are hot. They are giving off lots of heat. And they are spreading the chemicals out everywhere. The log that was made out of sugar, right? All plants are made out of sugar. Wood is just sugar. The cellulose is spreading back into carbon dioxide and oxygen. That's where they were originally. Now they're just going back to that. That reaction, you just light that fire, boom, that thing's going to go. That reaction is fabulous energy-wise. And a couple other examples that I've used in the past, there's more, is just melting. If you're melting something, did I get those right? Oh, yeah, no, that's right. You got to put, if something's melting, it's giving off its energy and it's spreading out. And, or actually, you're taking in energy. Sorry, you had it backwards. And then freezing is just the reverse. With something that's got to freeze, it's got to get rid of its heat, and it will start to come together. Those reactions can go. There is this last fourth category that it's a really hard category. And it is this last one where you've got to try to get rid of heat, and you got to make it very organized. And so it's fighting entropy, and it's fighting the heat. And out of these four, we've got to try to figure out, where does life's reactions fall in? Because if it falls in one of these 3 or 4 categories, some of these are great. These reactions are just going to go right away. Now, there is a physics faculty member, and he said, look, if you just start with a random clump of atoms and you put light in it, if you just put energy in it and you wait long enough, you should get a plant. Now he backs this up with some of his calculations and using some thoughts there, that if you put enough energy into something, it should organize it. But I don't think that's the case. So I'm going to do one more experiment here, and then we're going to come up with a thought and let Rob finish it here. So I've got one more that we're going to do here. So I'm going to move this off. All right. So the experiment that Jeremy England, man, I forgot. Oh dear, there's vinegar that I need. It's in the big bin. You'll smell it. All right. So what I have here is I'm going to put carbon dioxide and water. They are the 2 ingredients that you need to make sugar, to make a plant, just like Jeremy England is asking us to do. Now to set that up, I'm going to do an experiment here. So I just have good old plain fashioned water here. Oh, well, I'll try to be steady. Yep, there you go. Yep. Yeah, and I'll be steady too. All right, so I'm going to put in some phenolphthalein here, and this is a color-changing chemical reaction. Okay, we put a couple drops in there, no color. So this is good old clean water, and I'm going to put in some sodium hydroxide and change the pH here with a couple of drops. Whoa, isn't that fun? Now that's a color change. So that's chemistry that's taking place. Now this water is just good old plain water. Now what I'm going to do is change this water. It was water that I brought in here. It's distilled water. And I put it on this side over here. Now I'm going to make some carbon dioxide with some baking soda, and some vinegar. I just reversed the order, so I got to work quick. Okay, and I'm spilling it there. Okay, so this baking soda and vinegar reaction is now going to produce carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide is now being pushed into the water. And essentially what Jeremy England is saying, I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt here, is that if we shine light on this reaction right here, that should turn into sugar and oxygen. But we may have to wait a few million years. So I hope we've got enough food, you guys. So, all right. So this is what we're doing here. And we are changing the water. Kids, if you want to carbonate your own water, this is actually kind of a fun way to do it at home. Okay? Fun science experiment. We're changing the water with the carbon dioxide. I'm making soda. What do you guys call it? What do you call it here in Minnesota? Is it soda or is it pop? Pop? Okay, because that's what, in Michigan, we called it pop when I was growing up, because this is about ready to pop. And I always thought that just didn't sound right, so I call it soda, like my southern friends. Unless you're from Texas, what do you guys know what they call it in Texas? Coke, all right, good. They call it Coke. And that makes no sense. All right. So this right here is water that has carbon dioxide in it. And that is actually, what category reaction was that one, Rob? I think that, what's that? I think that was 2. Yeah. So this actually falls in one of those categories of we've got the right ingredients, we pressured it in, and now I'm going to release the pressure in here. Just in case you didn't believe. Does that sound like soda pop? Yeah. Okay. And I have a note on here, you got to open this side first, because if you do it the other way, it doesn't work. All right, so this water has been changed into something. Okay? So I'm going to repeat this experiment that I did here. Okay? I put some phenolphthalein in there. Now I'm going to see if I can get it to change colors. Okay? Well, it looks like there's a little pink. Nope, it went away. Let's put some more sodium hydroxide in here. And it's not changing colors. I'm going to put a lot more in there. And it's not changing colors. I'm going to put a lot more in there. It's not changing colors. I'm going to put a lot more in there. And it's not changing colors. Let's put a lot more in there. Oh, there we go. No, it's not changing colors. What is going on? All right, we're just going to leave it like that for right now, and because I'm getting stuff on my hands here. So that water, what happened? It did not make sugar and oxygen. And we got to go back to our slides here. It made carbonic acid. And it will make it every single time that I run that reaction. And I've run it lots of times here. Okay, let's see if this works. Here we go. It will always, I can do that all the time. I can shine light on it, and I can provide energy, and it will never make sugar. Wouldn't that be cool if you could just add those two things and make sugar? That won't work. Why? Because there is an energy problem that happens that light won't fix it. Even if you shine on it for 1 billion years, it won't do it no matter what. And it's this question of entropy and of enthalpy, of heat. And if you're in the right category, you can overcome the bad energy that's there. But if you're in that 4th category, we don't know how to get around the energy problem. And the reason why I bring this up is that Christians will often say, well, there is no life, we can't make life because of thermodynamics and entropy. And we'll say, yeah, because everything's organized. And then other scientists will come in and say, well, that's wrong because we can use energy to overcome entropy. And they're right. But that's only with one of those categories. Actually, with the 2nd and 3rd categories, you can do this. There is this last category. It doesn't work. You can't just put energy in to overcome entropy. And so this is what we want to finish and talk about here. Why is this important? Because if you know what category you're in, you know how to plan for those chemical reactions. If it's the 1st category, you just light a match and it'll work. If it's the 2nd category, we need to cool it down. 3rd category, we warm it up. And the 4th one, I know how to make the 4th one work. We design a system and we can control the energy just like we're trying to get the skier to go up the hill. You can get them to go up the hill if you design the right system. So the question then becomes, out of these 4 categories that we have of chemical reactions, and this summarizes all of the chemical reactions that are out there, which one does life depend on? And Rob's going to come give us the answer on that.
Okay, just to review these, this category number 1 is the easiest one. It's kind of like burning wood, which makes the water and carbon dioxide. It's kind of like your car rusting. Does your car just rust all by itself? It's pretty easy. Number 2 is water plus CO2 makes bubbly water. That's what Ryan just did. He made bubbly water. Number 3 is CO2 being released from bubbly water. That's when he opens the cap and you hear that. It's also probably what happens when you burp. You got CO2, you got to release. Number 4 is the one that is not favorable. Thermodynamics says, no way is this going to happen. That's like your car unrusting. Has anybody ever seen a car unrust? Or it's like taking CO2 and water and making wood or sugar. Doesn't happen. All you get is bubbly water. So which one of these is life based on? And if all of the chemical reactions in life were number 1 or 2 or 3, that wouldn't be so bad. You could just take chemicals and apply some light or something and you'd end up with life. You could make life that way. The problem is that life is based on cells, and cells are very high energy and very organized. So life, that gives you kind of a hint that there's a lot of number 4 going on to make life, because you've got to have high energy and lots of organization. Number 4 is really the basis of life. All proteins, all DNA, all RNA, all polysaccharides, and wood is number 4. Got to have number 4. So how is natural process supposed to ever produce life? Because there's so much number 4, which is the most forbidden kind of natural reaction. Well, unfortunately, the people who think that life just started on its own, they're always going to point out exceptions, and they try to make a big deal of it. It's kind of like cherry picking the evidence. So this guy writes some books about how chemicals came together, he thinks, to start life. This is a paper about it. But when you read the fine print, you'll find, it says here in the fine print, we also note that our study addresses only monomers, not polymers. So they can get some of the building blocks, but they can't get anything like DNA, RNA, proteins to happen naturally. And this is basically cherry picking, and cherry picking is not good science. They're calling out the little exceptions they find to try to get you excited. We're going to talk about the Miller-Urey experiment. That's something that you've probably seen in your textbooks in school. And there's actually meteorites they could find in outer space that actually have some organic monomers, some basic chemicals in them. And they get all excited about that and say, hey, this could have started life. This is the Miller-Urey experiment. They took some methane, some ammonia, some hydrogen, and some water, and they boil it, and then they zap it with electricity. And after a few days out here, they could find, if they look closely in there, they could find some amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. And this was 1952, and it got people all excited. And people thought, if you just let this thing go for another few weeks, you might have a living thing. And that's because people back then, I think, didn't know how complicated life actually was. And they were overexcited about this. And we have actually opened up meteors coming from outer space. Meteor comes, they open it up and do some very careful chemical analysis, and they can find some amino acids in there. That's a fact. But you can't make too big of a deal of it. So we're going to do another one of our videos, a little video clip. Hope you enjoy it. But this is about finding these building blocks in outer space. This is actually reviewing 2 other videos that are already on YouTube that are very favorable about life starting on its own. And we're reviewing it to say these guys didn't get it right. So here we go.
Researchers have recently discovered that many of the building blocks of life, amino acids and sugars, exist inside of meteorites.
It's well known that space is full of the chemical building blocks of life, from amino acids to DNA and RNA letters, buried inside meteorites like this one that fell on Australia in 1969.
This tells us that these special molecules are being produced spontaneously all throughout our solar system and may have been common on the ancient Earth.
It shows the chemistry that makes biological molecules can happen pretty much anywhere.
The half of the story that's true is that we have found some building blocks in meteorites. The other half of the story they don't disclose is that, much like the Miller-Urey experiment, these building blocks and letters are utterly unusable because they're mixed in with millions of other molecules that we don't want and are even toxic to life. You could probably find some undigested molecules of flour and sugar inside of a fresh dog poo, but that doesn't mean you're on your way to making a birthday cake. Well, unless you don't like the person. Cakes need lots of pure, uncontaminated ingredients. So does life. Bringing up these meteorites is half true and very misleading.
Okay, I hope that gives you an idea. People get really excited they found some amino acids in a meteorite, but all of it is useless because there's so much other junk in there. And some people have admitted to that, which I appreciate. This paper said that that meteorite contains tens of thousands of different molecules types and likely millions of structures. So they're basically saying it's so diverse in there that you couldn't use it. And this origin of life researcher, he's also a Nobel laureate, Jack Szostak, he said the problem is that these collections of molecules are mostly things we don't want, very little of the right molecules in very low concentrations. So I applaud him for admitting that, because other people are blowing their trumpets saying, hey, we could start life just from stuff from outer space. There's another trick they use. So in the laboratory, like the Miller-Urey experiment, they'll mix some chemicals and they'll get a bunch of junk, and then they'll look very carefully in there and say, look, there's an amino acid in there. Then they'll do the next experiment where they buy a whole package of perfectly pure amino acids and try to take it to the next step. But they don't use the stuff they got out of the first experiment. That's called relay synthesis, and I'll play a little video about that.
Relay synthesis. They buy industrial strength ingredients to start with, make mostly garbage out of it, but may produce trace amounts of something they wanted. Like in this experiment, they yielded 0.011% of the nucleobase adenine. Then they declare success. These chemicals can technically be turned into adenine, even though it is unavailable to actually do anything because it's surrounded by garbage or consumed by side reactions and would quickly degrade, but whatever, details. For the next experiment, rather than starting with what the previous experiment actually produced, this mixture of garbage, instead they now feel justified in purchasing pure adenine from a laboratory supply shop to further cheat at the next step toward life. And this sort of thing happens over and over again, completely detached from reality.
So it's so common that it has its own name, relay synthesis, and it's been a trick they've been using, but they're kind of pulling the wool over our eyes, making people think that life could have come out of just chemicals. So once again, life has a lot of things that are based on category 4, and this is the most unfavorable kind of reaction. And so natural processes can't explain how life got started because life is based mostly on category 4. So you might be interested in knowing this because we all overcome category 4 reactions. We overcome it every day. And it's kind of like getting a skier to go up a hill or getting a car to unrust. We do it all the time. So how do we do it? Have you ever wondered that? How do we overcome it? Well, there's two main approaches. One is that we do this energy harnessing process. And we couple in our bodies, we couple a reaction that generates energy with a reaction that needs energy. And they're partners, and you can actually drive these quadrant 4 reactions that way. Let me show you a video on that part, which is kind of fun. This is all about why life is so picky about the energy that it uses and how it has to be really picky or else you'll die.
It's true, the universe has plenty of raw energy out there, but there's a very important difference between that and what life can actually use to exist. Life is pretty picky. It needs very specific kinds of energy, and it needs to be fed it in a very particular kind of way. Otherwise, it's kind of like trying to charge your cell phone with a charcoal grill. There's lots of energy in the grill, but none of it is usable for your poor, dying phone. To harness the raw energy of the grill into something your phone can use, you would need a set of pretty complex machines. A boiler to heat water into steam, a turbine that the steam pressure can spin, an electric generator, then transformers, converters, regulators to get the energy in just the right form. And then you need the right kind of charger plug thing for your phone, and if you're lucky, the cable's long enough so that you can lay in bed while it charges, and that's some weird angle. But, like life, your cell phone isn't just picky, it's also fragile. Not only will the grill not charge your cell phone, but it'll also destroy it. If the little circuits and bits in your cell phone get too much energy, or even a little bit of the wrong kind of energy, it's done for. Ooh, battery's almost dead, let's get you some energy. Energy! 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 Raw forms of energy can only be used for life if complex machines are available to harness them, and the wrong kind of energy will destroy life.
Okay, so you know that life is very picky about the kind of energy it has. There's a little bit of food here. Have you ever wondered when you eat something like that, how it is that your body harnesses that energy? What does it do to that food? I'm chewing it, but that's not harnessing energy. Well, it's a complex process, just like trying to charge your phone with a charcoal grill. You need all that machinery to get the energy in just the right form. Your body takes this energy. It's incredible, I'm telling you. Right now, my body is stripping electrons off of that food I just ate, stripping electrons, and it uses them to pump protons across the membrane, which generates a voltage across the membrane, an electrical voltage. That electrical voltage is used to twist an electrical motor at 6,000 RPM all over the place inside of my body, and that's used to charge up batteries, and those batteries are used to run all the machinery, muscles, everything. I can talk. Isn't that incredible? Let me show you a little more detail of how that works in this part of the video.
Even the simplest forms of life harness energy through a three-step process. The fancy term for this process is romantically known as charismatic coupling. First, three proton-pumping complexes known by their friends as NADH ubiquinone oxyreductase, coenzyme Q cytochrome C oxyreductase, and cytochrome C oxidase. These guys are also known as the respiratory complexes, and together are made of about 25 different proteins, each of which is very fancy in its own regard, consisting of hundreds of precise amino acids. Anyway, these proton complexes use electrons that are stripped off the cell's food source to power machines that pump protons, known as proton pumps, resulting in fewer protons inside the membrane and more protons outside, which conveniently provides an electrical voltage, or a gradient. The respiratory complexes have to be complex because stripping electrons is a dangerous process, like handling a bomb. If any of the 15 reaction steps in this process are mishandled, the loose electrons will destroy the first molecule they encounter. But physics is pretty unhappy about these protons getting kicked out of the cell membrane club and wants to shove them back in. So, step 2. The disgraced protons are only allowed back into the cell if they first turn an electric generator called ATP synthase. In the simplest form of life, ATP synthase is a machine made from at least 20 interconnecting proteins, and it requires other proteins to help assemble it too. Complexity upon complexity. Nick Lane, an Origin of Life researcher and biochemist at University College London, describes ATP synthase as the most impressive nanomachine of them all. It is hard to convey the astonishing complexity of this protein motor. This is precision engineering of the highest order, a magical device, and the more we learn about it, the more marvelous it becomes. Rotation of this ATP synthase motor is used to recharge dead batteries, ADP, turning them into ATP. It doesn't look all that complicated until you realize it looks more like this. And this is slowed down by more than 10-fold. And the cell membrane is so densely packed with these machines, they effectively make the entire surface of the membrane. Step 3. The charged up ATP is plugged into a wide variety of other biological machines to power all the living stuff we need to do, like building proteins, repairing DNA, replication, cell division, blinking, subscribing to this YouTube channel, you name it. When the ATP is discharged and turned into ADP, it gets sent back to the ATP synthase to get charged up again. Fun fact, a typical human generates and uses roughly 1 billion trillion ATP molecules per second. That's your entire body weight in ATP every single day. Whoa. Here's the paradox. The cell needs to make ADP, the empty batteries of life, before they can be charged up to ATP and put to use. But producing one new empty battery requires at least 7 already charged batteries. So you can't make ADP until you already have ATP around in the cell. And ATP is required to build ATP synthase. But ATP synthase is required to charge ADP into ATP. So life's energy harnessing process is one big paradox. You need it before you can have it, and you can't make it until you've already made it.
So it's yet another paradox. Natural processes can't solve such a paradox, but we solve it every day. Isn't it incredible that granola bar is now turning an engine inside of me and recharging batteries, and the batteries are being used for all kind of stuff? Fantastic. Okay, so that's one approach that life uses to overcome these difficult quadrant 4 reactions. One other approach, this is a little subtle one, is through something called Le Chatelier's principle. Let's say we have a single strand of DNA and we want it to grow. We want to make it a longer polymer, and we get a monomer, so this gets to be added onto the chain to make DNA. The monomer has to be activated. It gets activated through ATP. ATP adds energy to it. Now it's energized and ready to go. But you also need an enzyme, DNA polymerase, and that enzyme helps to make the reaction happen. And it hooks it on, it bonds, and that kicks off this byproduct. And this byproduct is called pyrophosphate. The problem is that byproduct could jump right back down, break the bond, and set things back to the way they were. In fact, it would like to do that. Well, God made us so smart that this same DNA polymerase destroys the byproduct. It just wipes it out, takes it off, so that the reaction stands the way it is. It doesn't go backward. Pretty smart. That's another thing our bodies do to overcome these quadrant 4 reactions. Not only do we have a lot of these quadrant 4 reactions, these are the ones that thermodynamics says don't happen naturally, but life actually requires a lot of this to happen. Why is that? If all of life's reactions did occur spontaneously, you would basically just burn up and die because you're completely out of control, and you would have death. You would become what's called thermodynamic equilibrium. Imagine if all of the monomers in your body spontaneously linked without any help. They just all link up. Then everything would become random spaghetti, and you would die. It's spaghetti chaos. So not only do the quadrant 4 reactions have to be controlled, it turns out that all of the reactions in your body are very carefully controlled. All of the reactions. And this is a good quote on that, saying that everything has to be controlled, or else, because chemistry is far too indiscriminate and uncontrollable. So thank you, God, that He made all of our reactions very well controlled. And this is not just in humans, but all of life, even the simplest life, even the simplest form of life that you can't even see, uses ATP synthase, chemiosmotic coupling like we just showed. All of that process is in even the simplest of life. So how could it ever have gotten started on its own? That's the question. So Ryan's going to wrap this up.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Just a couple last thoughts here that Rob kind of touched base on. And I mean, why would God put this? Why would He have entropy? Why is there a force out there that splits everything up? And Rob kind of alluded to that. We need these reactions to run when they're needed. And entropy is that force that is spreading things out, and it's keeping things spread out. And we want that to happen. We need that to happen. And I believe that there's purpose behind that. We often think of, oh, we don't like entropy, it's chaos, and it's leading to, well, I think that's the wrong idea. And I found this quote. It says, the universe and all its connected earth will come to an end, and entropy carries us towards the inevitable omega point, whatever that is, and that's why entropy exists. Because I did a little search. Why does entropy exist on Google? And it's basically entropy is trying to just kill us all, is what that quote is saying. But yet, that's not what we see. We actually see that entropy is a balance. You see, we've got gravity that's bringing things together, Coulomb's force, so there's a lot of these forces, magnetism, and there's things that are bringing things together. But there are forces in nature that God put out there to repel things and to break them up, and one of the big ones is entropy. And we need things to stay apart until they're needed to be brought together. And it wouldn't be any fun if you went into your Legos, and then every time you walked into your Legos, they're already put together, but not putting together in a way that they turn into something. It's just some random pile, and then some random pile. We like it when our Legos are spread apart so that we can go in and we can put them together when we want them and how we want them. And that's what chemistry and understanding energy is all about. It's about control, turning them on when we want them to, when they're needed, and exactly when they're needed, and how fast. All of that is not left to chance. And that's what Rob and I have been seeing, is that everything in nature is not natural, and it's not left to chance. It's controlled, and all of these energy switches keep it that way. And so as we'll end with Romans 1:20 and 21, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, everything that we've been talking about here, very invisible. All these molecules, hard to see until we had the right microscopes. But yet we clearly see the invisible things being understood by the things that are made. This to me is the Bible verse that I think underscores what chemistry is. We use chemistry to understand who God is. And we can see his power and his Godhead. And when you see those things, you're without excuse. There is no excuse to deny that there is a God if we understand how all of this is put together. But Romans predicts that there was going to be a time where there's going to be people who see this and says they do not believe in God, they did not know God, they did not glorify him, and they weren't thankful. They became futile in their thoughts and foolish in their hearts, and their hearts were darkened. So we wanted to make sure that the molecules, that we're understanding their message and they're testifying that there's a creator. And we want to be thankful. So thank you, Lord. Amen. All right. Yeah, if there's any questions, we'll wrap it up here. And I think we've got some energy production process getting ready to be lined up. So.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have a blessing on our food a little bit. But does anyone have any questions about thermodynamics? And yes, okay.
So I saw another creation science apologist talk about that machine that was made that had amino acids. Yeah. And if I remember right, he said all of the amino acids it made were left-handed, and we need right-handed for life.
Ooh,
so
I'm going to talk about that in the next talk. Yeah.
I'll stop talking.
Yeah. But what was the, well, that's coming. I've got a little bit on that. Okay. Yeah, left and right-handed molecules. Nice. It's even more complicated and more beautiful.
Is that the chirality?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So there we go. Plug. We're going to have something to eat, and then we'll be back here at 7 o'clock. Any more questions?
And feel free, obviously, to come talk to us.
Yeah, definitely. So, all right. Well.
Should we have a prayer for the food now, and then
yes.
everybody can go eat?
Yeah.
Would you like me to pray?
Sure.
Okay. Let's bow your head. Father God in heaven, thank you for energy, that we can just go and eat it, and that all these wonderful processes take place inside of us. Thank you. Bless this food. Bless our interactions and our time together, and may you be glorified for the great work that you have done to give us energy. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
All right, but the all-pervading question is, what was your snack? A granola bar. Okay, all right. Okay, we just had to know what you were eating up here. Yeah, that's all. Okay. Yeah, right. All right, so yes, we have food. You're all invited to a nice complimentary meal over in the fellowship hall, and we'll be back at 7 o'clock for science faith in the book of Revelation, or science in the book of Revelation, something like that. So it's going to be good. It's science.